Hello and welcome to the Financing a Sustainable Future podcast, brought to you by the Initiative in Sustainable Finance, funded by the Global School of Sustainability here at LSE. I'm Tom Gosling, Professor in Practice and Director of the Initiative. This is a podcast where we talk to LSE academics about their research on sustainable finance in a way that is accessible for practitioners. I'm delighted to be joined today by Suren Gomtsyan, Assistant Professor at the LSE Law School, to discuss the paper The Emergence of Pass-through Voting and its Implications for Shareholder Stewardship, which is a working paper but also forthcoming in the Journal of Corporation Law. As Suren's co-author on this paper, I'm particularly looking forward to this conversation. So Suren, welcome.
Thank you for the invitation, Tom. I'm delighted to be part of your podcast series.
If we go back in time, then asset owners like insurers and pension funds would directly own shares in companies and would therefore vote those shares at annual general meetings. But over the last few decades, the asset management industry has become increasingly disintermediated. So asset owners commonly delegate investment to an asset manager. And in the case where the asset owner has a so-called segregated mandate, they still legally own and vote the shares, but increasingly investments are held in the form of pooled fund vehicles like unit trusts or mutual funds. These create economies of scale, but mean that it is the asset manager of the fund that exercises stewardship and votes the shares. And pass-through voting has emerged as a way for asset owners to provide some direction to how the asset manager votes their share of investments held in the pooled fund. The precise extent of that direction depends on the model of pass-through voting that's been adopted. And in this way, asset owners can potentially get the best of both worlds, lower costs because of economies of scale, without completely losing control over how shares are voted. But this simple picture hides a lot of complexity. So Suren, how is it that pass-through voting really works? And why is it attracting so much interest now?
At the beginning of the project, when we started, I thought I knew how pass-through voting works, but very quickly it became clear that people meant different things. And one of the first steps in this project was actually trying to make sense how it works. And in principle, I think there are three different main models how to implement pass-through voting. And they are related actually to what we discussed earlier about the options available to investors who have these separately managed accounts, segregated mandates. One option is to come to an asset manager with your own voting policy. So this is what some asset owners would do. It's not very common, and not all asset managers who have pass-through voting offer this option to their clients. So an asset owner can select own voting policy, could be their own in-house policy, could be a third-party policy of their choice, which they bring to the asset manager and then ask asset manager to implement that policy. The second option, more common, especially in the US, is when the asset manager itself will select different voting policies, which will be, of course, the asset manager's own policy, plus some third-party policies, mostly offered by proxy voting advisors. And the asset manager offers this menu of policies to their clients, and they have a choice to select one from the menu, but they cannot come with their own.
And this menu, they'll have different flavors, like a sustainability policy.
Yeah, exactly. And the choices will also differ across asset managers. Some will offer a limited choice, several options. Others will have a quite broad range of different policies which reflect different preferences. And the third option is, again, similar to what is available in segregated mandates, is when asset owners generally delegate voting to the managers as usual. So the manager is going to vote the shares held by the fund, but the asset owner can select either some companies or different types of voting matters. And then on these selected matters, they will have an option to give indication. So we call this vote indication option, and we say that this is our preferred or best model for implementing pass-through voting. Probably later we'll have some time to discuss why it is the best option. And here, so typically what will happen, this is maybe the costly and more complex way of implementing pass-through voting. It requires some expertise on the asset owner side. And what they will do is either select, let's say, top 100 or top 500 companies where they have the largest holdings, depending on their resources, or could be that they will select a type of a matter where they have expertise, let's say climate or remuneration related, or where they think that they will have divergence in preferences or in voting
from the asset manager.
From the asset manager.
Right. Yeah. So the paper focuses on the UK institutional market. What are the main contextual factors that are causing pass-through voting to gain prominence now amongst UK investors?
Yes. So in the paper we say that given the market trajectory and the evolution of shareholder stewardship, pass-through voting was kind of inevitable. Either pass-through voting or something similar would have emerged. And there are several reasons for this. We focus on the UK market, but some of these are actually not specific only for the UK market. So these are general trends happening across many countries. The first is the changing structure of ownership in listed companies, because many asset owners, pension funds, insurance companies, historically tended to invest directly. And as a result, they also could vote the shares. This has changed with the growth in intermediation. So one result of this change is that asset owners are not voting anymore. Asset managers are the one who's voting. And at the same time also the increasing proliferation of passive index funds has led also to the situation when, in most of the situations, active managers who had strong links with portfolio companies, their role has been diminished, so they're not the ones who are voting. So less voting by asset owners, and at the same time also type of voting where it's more distanced or there is no close relationships with companies. The second factor is the evolving role of shareholder voting, because again, historically, most of the investors, the institutional investors, they did not really vote all of their shares. They would probably intervene. They had engagements with companies, but they would intervene and vote in most serious situations when there were financial problems or some scandals and there was a need to change the management. This has changed. There is an expectation that investors will vote always, and they'll vote voting to steer how companies are run. So it's a second factor. And at the same time, with the increasing this expectation of voting, of course, many asset managers are not able to vote on an individual basis, every company. So there's more stronger reliance on proxy advisory firms and more standardization in voting. And the third factor, maybe probably the most important for the emergence of pass-through voting, is that there's also a growing diverse beliefs in voting and in shareholder stewardship more broadly. Whereas, again, historically, most of the investors, they converged on financial performance-related matters, on corporate governance, because there was an idea, what is good corporate governance? The broadening of voting topics to include environmental and social aspects brought more voices, more perspectives into voting and shareholder stewardship. And as a result, the divergence between asset owners and asset managers has increased. So combined these three factors, we argue that they created both demand side and supply side pressures for the emergence of pass-through voting. On the demand side, there was a need for some kind of mechanisms which would allow asset owners to express their preferences in the voting process. And on the supply side, because of more attention to voting and these divergent ideological beliefs, it became more politicized, especially in the US. And at least for some asset managers, pass-through voting has become an attractive way to deflect or to manage these political risks. And so if asset owners would long demand something similar to pass-through voting and asset managers would resist to this, all of a sudden these interests converged, and there was conditions were there for the emergence of pass-through voting. Plus to that, of course, also technological developments made it more feasible and relatively cheaper to offer.
So I'd like now to discuss the motivations of different actors in the investment chain in relation to pass-through voting, and the core of this study was a series of structured interviews that we undertook across the investment chain, facilitated by the Issue and Investor Forum. And let's start with asset owners, who are obviously the key client in this. What do we find out about their motivations for looking at pass-through voting?
We talked to different types of asset owners by size, but also mostly UK-based. But also we talked to asset owners who have adopted pass-through voting and those who have considered and decided not to adopt pass-through voting. And one thing which really struck me, at least me during the interviews, was that in all of these cases, the decision they made was very carefully considered decision, whether to adopt, not to adopt, if to adopt, how to implement it. And I think two key motivations, I probably cannot say which one is more important, two key motivations came out as the main drivers for asset owners in adopting pass-through voting. One is strengthening the reflection of their views and beliefs in shareholder voting decisions, because in an ideal world, we expect asset owners to select asset managers which are aligned on voting decisions with them. But this doesn't happen in practice often for different reasons. It could be because voting is one of the factors based on which asset owners select their managers, but not the only one. There are many other factors which are considered in this process. That's the cost of services, that's the availability of other services offered by the asset manager, the range of products. And also for some asset owners, it's actually quite costly to switch managers, because not only it's about the fees, but also there can be important tax consequences. Probably not for pension funds, which are tax exempt, but at least for some other asset owners, that's a major issue. So in the world where it's not easy to switch asset managers and achieve alignment across the investment chain, pass-through voting is a pragmatic second best option for asset managers to achieve alignment on that voting aspect. And this was a major reason for many asset owners who adopted pass-through voting, saying that they didn't feel that we are aligned on voting with their manager, hence they adopt pass-through voting to better express their views, better express their beliefs. The second factor, which is probably, again, I say second, but it's probably the same level, is using pass-through voting to achieve consistency across the holdings of asset owners. Consider a large asset owner which has investments in different funds, probably managed by several different asset managers, and at the same time also may have investments in segregated mandates where this asset owner is making their own voting decisions. And in this case, pass-through voting is a good way to achieve consistency across all of these holdings. And we had an example of an asset owner which explained that they co-sponsored a shareholder proposal, they engaged with the company, were not very happy with the outcome of the engagement and wanted to ensure that their vote across all their holdings reflected the outcome of their engagement with the company.
So that's asset owners. What about the key motivations of asset managers offering pass-through voting?
For asset managers, it's very interesting because if we look to the media discussion, if we look to the literature, the most of the attention is actually on the supply side, right? The argument is that pass-through voting, some asset managers, they decided to offer pass-through voting programs to deflect that political criticism, political scrutiny of their voting decisions, especially in the US where ESG has become such a politicized topic. This is for sure part of a story, but it's not the only one, because one of the important takeaways, I think, from our interviews is that the key factor which asset managers are considering in offering pass-through voting or not is about the decision comes down ultimately to demand or the lack of it from their clients. And US index fund managers seem to be more positive on pass-through voting. They, in addition to client demand, they often also refer to the value created by offering more choice to their clients. And even if there are hypothetically, let's say, some negative implications of pass-through voting, they don't see any concerns here because more choice does not do any bad. If clients are not convinced or clients think that there are negative consequences, they will simply not use pass-through voting. Whereas European asset managers have more concerns about the negative implications of pass-through voting related to engagement, related to the clarity of communications and access to portfolio companies. But even then, even they admit that client demand is the main factor. And we had an interesting discussion with one of asset managers who explained that although philosophically they were concerned, opposed to pass-through voting, when it comes to a decision whether to offer or not, they clearly distinguish between the pass-through voting implications for shareholder stewardship on one side and the commercial rationale of offering it on the other side.
So if clients want it, it will get offered. It's the same in most customer-facing industries. So let's just dig into some of these disadvantages a little bit more, because not everybody thinks that pass-through voting is a great idea. What were the main reasons put forward by asset owners and asset managers who are not looking to adopt the practice, or who just didn't like it?
Yeah, exactly. So not everyone is happy with pass-through voting, especially among active asset managers. There are strong concerns, and two main concerns are related first to the access to the company, access to issuers. Why? Because they are concerned that pass-through voting will limit this access, because issuers have, of course, constraints, limited resources with which investors to engage, and very understandably they prioritize investors who have larger holdings. And pass-through voting is fragmenting the voice of an asset manager, and as a result may make it less appealing for an issuer to talk to an asset manager. And this is a big concern for active managers, because they really need engagements with companies. It's an important source of soft information which informs trading decisions. So it's one of the major concerns for active managers. Another major concern is related to the potential impact of pass-through voting on the effectiveness of engagement with issuers, because not only it fragments the vote, but also can send confusing signals to companies, because asset managers can engage on a certain topic with an issuer, but then the vote will not reflect that engagement, and this creates many questions on both sides, asset manager and issuer.
What about asset owners themselves? I mean, because it was interesting that a number of asset owners were very strong advocates for pass-through voting. Actually, some were less so. Was it just the same set of cluster of issues around effectiveness and stewardship that they were most concerned about?
For asset owners, they have concerns related to the effectiveness of engagement. But one thing probably I can highlight about asset owners is that with pass-through voting, they have more say on voting decisions, but not always they have resources also to the engagement. And even if they do want to do the engagement themselves, they don't have this history, they don't have the experience, and many of them shared that for them it was actually quite complicated to establish the links with issuers. And issuers also don't see them as among their investors, because, as we discussed, the holder on the record is a fund itself, and clients, investors in the fund, they don't appear anywhere in the record. So it's also hard for asset owners to approach an issuer and say that we are, by the way, one of your end investors and voters, and we want to engage with you. So similar concerns related to engagement, concerns related to the access to issuers, and the possible fragmentation of the votes.
So let's come on to issuers then, who are at the end of this chain, because we did include engagement with issuers in the project. How did they feel about the emergence of pass-through voting, and was it really affecting them?
It's probably fair to say that many issuers have not yet directly experienced pass-through voting and haven't seen the outcome, the impact of pass-through voting on the voting outcomes. But that said, for sure, certainly they are aware about this. Many of them have discussed this at the board level, or maybe at the level of corporate secretaries, the forums of corporate secretaries. But at the moment have not experienced the impact of pass-through voting on voting outcomes. We had only one example of an issuer which had some suspicions that the voting outcome did not reflect their engagement with the investors, and they had suspicions that this could have been because of pass-through voting, but it could equally be related to split voting in segregated mandates, which have been there for many years. That is something new. Or it could have been because they had an asset manager who's managing different funds with different profiles, and these funds voted shares in different directions. So no direct experience, but they have concerns. These concerns at the moment are more hypothetical, but also quite well-founded concerns. I think probably the main one which I will highlight is how to identify investors and voters with whom they need to engage, because the owner on the record is a fund, and for issuers there is no any realistic way to any available record where they can see who are investors in a fund who have adopted pass-through voting and through that pass-through voting are influencing the voting decisions. Identification of investors is already a quite complex task for issuers, especially because of the custody chains. But they found ways. There's a section in the Companies Act which allows them to request information about investors who have an interest in their shares. It will be more complicated with pass-through voting, because other than asking the asset manager directly to disclose this information, which I suppose many asset managers will not do because of confidentiality issues, there's no other way for them at the moment to identify their end voters.
Yeah.
And another concern, which reflects what we discussed earlier, concerns by asset managers, is related to the effectiveness of engagement and communications, because when issuers engage with companies, they want them to deliver the votes. But if the asset manager cannot commit to that because of pass-through voting, then that creates issues for them in predicting the voting outcomes, but also in communications with asset managers.
So that adds complexity and cost to the whole engagement process for issuers. And so, I mean, these different perspectives show that there are different views you could take about whether pass-through voting is positive or negative for stewardship quality. There are clearly things on both sides of the ledger. So how should we think about these positives and negatives, and how should we think about the cases where it may or may not be good for stewardship?
So a structured way to think about this is to treat pass-through voting as a three-way trade-off between the expression of preferences of investors, asset owners, informed voting, and preservation of complementarities between the three main elements of stewardship, which is investment decision-making, voting, and engagement. So pass-through voting is almost always a good thing, is almost always beneficial for the expression of asset owner preferences, investor preference. Right?
Yeah, by definition.
Exactly. As we discussed earlier, when you cannot achieve alignment across the investment chain, pass-through voting is a very pragmatic way to achieve alignment at least at the voting part of the relationships with the asset manager. But this benefit, this good side of expressing preferences comes at a cost. And one potential cost is the disconnect, is the disruption between interconnections between the stewardship elements, investment decision-making, voting, and engagement, because they are linked to each other. When an investor makes a decision to invest in a company, they acquire information which can be used during voting. And then voting, in turn, creates conditions and supports the investor's engagement. Engagement creates more information which can be used both for making informed voting decisions, but also for portfolio decisions, for investment decision making. So when you separate this voting aspect from investment decision making and engagement, then all three are affected, and the quality of engagement and investment decision making can also decrease. The second cost is related to the second cost of greater preference alignment is related to the informed voting by asset owners who are adopting pass-through voting, precisely because the only source of it, so they are becoming informed only for voting purpose, whereas asset managers who make also investment decisions and engagement, they get information also for these purposes. And there's also obviously the economies of scale. Information acquisition costs can be shared across a larger holding. But I need to be clear here that probably in most of the situations, it's fair to say that asset owners will be less informed on company-specific business-related matters, but that's not always the case, because there may be types of matters, issues, where there is less need for company-specific information for voting, or also might be companies where an asset owner has more information than an asset manager. But think about local pension funds, which knows local companies better, understands the culture better, maybe has also links with the boards and will be better informed in voting than the asset manager. But generally, it's probably fair to assume that in most of the situations, asset managers will be better informed than asset owners. And then we can apply this framework to different contexts and situations to identify the costs and benefits of pass-through voting in these different circumstances. So we apply this to index fund managers and to active managers, and the argument is that pass-through voting probably fits better with the model of index fund managers because they don't make the investment decision making. Usually this is delegated to the index provider, so they don't have information acquired through this investment decision making. They also rely less on engagement for information acquisition purposes, and accordingly, the costs of separating voting from investment decision-making and engagement are lower for index fund managers than for active managers. And we also need to take into account that because of the scale, many of these index funds, they have a very diverse client base. So the likelihood of divergence between the preferences of clients at different ends, ideological ends, and the index fund manager itself is larger. Active managers are in a very different position because they make investment decisions, they engage for information acquisition purposes. So voting is important and is interconnected with other elements. And probably also because of size, it's maybe also fair to say that in most of the situations, they have more homogeneous client base. And to go back to the models of pass-through voting, I said earlier that we think the third model, this vote indication model, is the best way of implementing pass-through voting. It is because it's the least disruptive.
So this is where an asset owner might come in on specific votes, specific companies, and do an override of
exactly. So the asset managers continues voting on most of the matters, but there is a list of matters which the asset owner thinks either they have very divergent views, or maybe they have better information, better expertise, and on these matters, they will indicate the asset manager how to vote. So it's the least disruptive option. It allows asset owners which adopt pass-through voting to consider carefully where are the costs of pass-through voting, where are the benefits, and then where they have benefits on these matters or on these companies, we can actually implement pass-through voting and leave everything else to the asset manager.
I think that model, the predictions of that model were actually borne out in the market, because we found that actually a lot of asset owners did take a sort of index first approach to adoption of pass-through voting and actually recognised that with their active managers, voting came as a package with other things. So I think that model has sort of stood the test of the scrutiny of the interviews. But I'd like to now come on to an actor in the investment ecosystem that causes a lot of people to sort of foam at the mouth, perhaps in my view somewhat unfairly, and that's proxy advisors. So a commonly expressed concern about pass-through voting is it has the potential to hand much greater influence to proxy advisors. I mean, why is that put out as a view, and is the concern justified?
Pass-through voting is going to increase the situations when voting by investors is not done independently. It's automatic voting based on a policy offered by a proxy advisors. And this is a concern because at the moment, the way voting works is that proxy advisors, they send their recommendations to their clients, and clients have, in most of the situations, probably they follow them, especially on trivial matters. But it's an input in their decision making, and it's not the only factor. And in some situations, investors, asset managers, they can actually vote differently. With pass-through voting, especially when it is implemented through policy options, policy menus, there is no this oversight. There is no fiduciary oversight on the investor side. The voting is done automatically. Once you select the policy, it will be implemented by the proxy advisor. And this is a big concern, and this may actually draw more attention to what is the role of proxy advisors in this process.
Do you see a role for regulation in relation to pass-through voting? Should it just be left to market forces to figure it out, or are there areas where regulators could usefully intervene?
So pass-through voting itself should be left to the market, and this is also a view of almost all market actors we interviewed, so no one really wants more regulation here. But I think there is a role for regulators in helping to build the appropriate infrastructure for implementing pass-through voting. And there are several issues here. One is related in relation to some of the pass-through voting implementation models. There may be an issue with the cutoff date by which votes must be sent to custodians, because different custodians have different cutoff dates. Even for the same issue, these dates can vary, and they are set days ahead of the shareholders meeting, and some standardization here will be helpful. And my understanding is that the European Commission is already considering some reforms in this area, and there will be also, based on that, will be some changes here in the UK. The second area where some regulatory intervention may be helpful is related to whether investor votes have been received and recorded. Again, this is an issue with custody chains, because sometimes investors may send their votes, but it gets lost somewhere across the chain. So again, the European Commission is considering adding a requirement for issuers, probably also for custodians, to confirm that they have received the votes for investors. And I'll expect that if pass-through voting really becomes, the take-up increases and it becomes a big thing, I'll expect that there will be also some pressure from issuers to change the rules on how they identify their investors, the end voters, because they will want to know who are these asset owners who are influencing their votes. This will be very complicated to implement, because asset owners, they don't appear, investing through funds, they don't appear in any records. But at the end, I think they will be beneficial for both sides, because it will help issuers to identify who are their end voters who can influence the votes. But also, it's probably good for asset owners, because it also allows them to engage with companies in case they need, because companies will know that they are the ones who are influencing the votes.
Yeah, I mean, on that last point, I mean, certainly quite consistent feedback we got was that the current UK disclosure rules don't really reflect the reality of a disintermediated investment chain. Well, Suren, thanks so much for that really fascinating discussion. I mean, it's a topic I found it really fascinating to explore, because, as you say, you start off with a very oversimplified view, perhaps with some prior prejudices about what's good and not, but when you dig into it, it's a very nuanced and multifaceted issue. So thanks very much for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you, Tom. This was a big pleasure.
You've been listening to the Financing a Sustainable Future podcast with me, Tom Gosling. If you enjoyed the conversation, please like, share and subscribe on your favourite platform. To find out more about the work of the Initiative in Sustainable Finance, which is funded by the Global School of Sustainability here at LSE, please go to fmg.ac.uk/ISF.